So, good afternoon, and well, thank you very much for inviting me. Indeed, I work as a climate journalist at the NOS, and indeed that's the main public TV news channel in the Netherlands, although it's not only TV, it's also radio and the internet, the website and the socials. And I want to tell you something about how I use data from Copernicus and also other climate organizations during my work. So let me see how this works. Yeah, well, here you can see an example of how I used data from Copernicus about Europe warming faster than any other continent in the world. And this was a story 2 years ago. And in the same article, I wrote that it wasn't clear yet why Europe is warming so faster than the other continents. And this was an article a year later, last year, and it said that 2020 was the warmest year ever recorded in Europe, and that the region with the biggest deviation was the Arctic and Siberia. And this was also based on data from Copernicus. And then this summer, a third example, I had an article about sunshine. Never before there was so much sunshine in the Netherlands. And according to the climate scientist I spoke to from the KNMI, this wasn't only the case in the Netherlands, but in a lot of countries, other European countries as well. And when it comes to heat, he said one of the reasons for the high temperatures in our country is the rapid warming of southern Europe. If the wind is coming from the south, warmer air comes to the Netherlands. And I also asked Copernicus about the reasons why this is happening. And well, you can see in the text, if you can read Dutch, you can see in the text how I used that for my article. And yes, for my article. But when it comes to the importance of data, climate data, I also would like to tell you something about my special trip to Spitsbergen, Svalbard, last summer, to report about the changing climate over there for the NOS. Although I didn't use data from Copernicus during that journey, it made it very clear to me how important data are. I'm standing here, by the way, with my colleague Emiel van Oers, and maybe you have seen his reports in the national news if you live in the Netherlands. It really was a good trip. We went to Edgeoya, that's the eastern part of Spitsbergen, and it's the fastest warming place on Earth. Over the past 60 years, the temperature has already risen there by 6 degrees, or 1 degree in 10 years. And we made reports about the consequences of that for plants, animals, the landscape, things like that. We were on a boat, this boat, for 11 days, and we saw beautiful landscapes. We were traveling together with 50 scientists with all different backgrounds, different disciplines. And apart from that, there were also 50 tourists traveling with us. The only problem we had, was a big problem, was that there were a lot more polar bears than expected. And that was the reason, yeah, well, it's in Dutch, of course, but it says, in Dutch, expedition at Spitsbergen was hindered by polar bears. And the reason, or it was the reason that we couldn't go ashore as much as we hoped for, because the policy was, if a bear was seen, we stayed away or left quickly. If we were already on land, the moment a polar bear approached in the distance, then we were immediately evacuated. But despite that, the people were very impressed by what they saw, of course, by the polar bears, other animals, the landscape, and so on. A lot of awes and ahs and everybody making pictures, but for me personally, in any case, it was much warmer than I expected. Sometimes you saw a lot of ice, but that was only sometimes. Most of the time, it was like this. The landscape was green. People could sometimes wear T-shirts on deck. It was regularly warmer than 10 degrees, maybe 14, 15 degrees Celsius. And over the past 10 years, I had prepared several reporting trips to the Arctic region. So I already had an idea what to expect. But to my surprise, there was another journalist from a national newspaper, and he was not very impressed by the trip. And I talked to him about it. And the reason he was a bit disappointed, we were standing here when we talked about it, was that he said, I don't see a changing climate. I maybe see green hills instead of impressive glaciers or sea ice, but I cannot compare it to other years, since this is my first visit here. Is the glacier you can see here, is it big or is it small? I don't see it. Is it big or small at this time of year? I don't see it. So I think that his statement, in a nutshell, explains why communication about climate change is so complicated. You can never see, of course, the change yourself. And that means you always have to rely on climate scientists. And they were there, of course. And I definitely don't want to criticize the people who organized the trip to Spitsbergen, because for me, it really was amazing, and I was very pleased that I could come along. But I do think that climate scientists have to be aware, maybe even more than they already are, that the greater public, and sometimes also journalists, always will need the figures to understand what's going on and why climate change is such an urgent problem. So the reason I have accepted this invitation was that I would like to underline this. Presenting data in a way that really everybody can understand it in a short notice is not something, in my opinion, that comes on top of scientific research. No, I would say it should be maybe even the most important thing, at least at this moment in time, because it's crucial, we all know it, that politicians and companies and the public understand why it's such an urgent problem. So, you can say, what does that mean in practice? Well, I think it means that scientists would have to think even more carefully about the way in which they present their data. For instance, I can see that the IPCC reports are much better now than they used to be. I hope I'm not insulting anybody here, I don't know. This is a picture we published at the NOS, Human Factor Clear Cause Global Warming, it says. And I think that was a very good example of, you can understand it very quickly. But still, I showed some parts of the summary for policymakers to colleagues of mine. And to be honest, they didn't like it. Parts of it are still too difficult to understand in a short notice. There are not enough visuals that really make clear what is meant. So it means that scientists, I think, should help the media and journalists more with how to understand everything. And of course, then you can ask me, well, how do I help the media best? Well, I can only speak for myself, of course. But when there's really an important story to tell, maybe a special research result, which is complicated to explain, well, then I think make sure the journalist knows that it's coming in advance. That's really important, because journalists need time to make a good report. And I know from experience, to report about climate change is much more difficult than to report about a lot of other subjects in society. So make sure that the journalist knows it, knows that it's coming in advance, and also give it to the journalist some days in advance under embargo, as we call that. Because even if all this has been successful, the journalist, certainly if he or she works for television, as I do, will still have to ensure that attractive images can be made, often in the own design of the special medium or channel you're working for. And even then, the journalist will still have to puzzle over how to summarize the message in an extremely short way, without, of course, compromising to the story, to the important nuances that are made. So, I hope everyone will give me his or her story, if you have one, in advance. And if it's a really good story, a story that's important for the greater public to know, the general public to know, then maybe I can work with it. Thank you for your attention.
Heleen, stay with us for 2 more minutes, if you don't mind. And
Okay.
thanks a lot for your wonderful insight into the work that you do. Are there questions from the audience for Heleen?
It was
Carlo.
really clear.
It was
I
so
think.
impressively clear. Do we have a mic? Thanks, Alexandra.
Okay.
Jelle, can we
Now
have
it
a mic?
works. Now it
Yes.
works. So thank you for the talk. Really nice, beautiful images. And thank you for this appeal to scientists to be more engaging and give journalists a story. And I see, because we have been through this discussion on a number of occasions, and there is always that level of tension between scientists wanting to be objective and providing, high quality data and don't go into the emotional part of the story, and the need of a journalist to have a story, to have something to tell. So how do you see that tension evolving? What do you think could be a good recommendation for scientists to go beyond the...
Sorry, a good?
Recommendation for scientists.
Yeah.
Sorry?
A good recommendation.
Recommendation.
Yeah, for scientists.
To report in an emotional way?
Well, I
No,
mean,
so the question is, there's a tension,
Yeah.
at least from the perspective of scientists. In the first place, they want to do their science, research the data, and not get involved into what is, quote unquote, emotionally a nice story for the public.
Yeah.
So how do you make that balance? What would be your recommendation?
Well, I think that's a really important topic you are talking about, because my experience during this trip at Spitsbergen was exactly, in all the conversations I had with scientists, this came up regularly. People saying, I'm really scared by what's happening, but my data are my data, and I cannot talk about my feelings or what I think is going on. And yeah, recommendation. I think when you talk about your scientific work, of course the data are the data, but I think you can make, how do you say that? You can make het onderscheid, you can divide between the data and about your personal things, your personal ideas, your personal feelings with what you examined. And if you always make it clear where is the border between these two, then it's always okay, I think.
Okay.
But not if you do not give the border explicitly, of course, then it's not okay. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting advice. Thanks, Heleen. Is there one more question? Because Heleen was very much on time. She's a TV journalist.
I come from a country where, Italy, where the climate matter is highly politicized. Is it politicized in this country as well?
Sorry,
Is it becoming a political in the sense of right, left, and so on? Is it becoming a political argument in this country?
Are there many political disagreements about the climate, if I'm not wrong, hopefully, in the Netherlands?
Yeah, of course there is. Yes, there is, but not anymore, as I see it, not anymore about the bigger picture, but of course, in a sense, in what the politician should do about it. Yes, that's all the time debated. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more, which is all the way. Yes. Thanks,
Thank you.
Alexandra.
Thank you for the talk, very interesting. So I would like to ask your experience on, do you see any, that your presentations or your reports have an impact to changing the behavior of the people? So it's difficult, but do you have a hint to that? Maybe?
Do you have impact measurements?
Yeah, well, not in how it affects people, if they change their behavior, if that's what you mean. But of course, we can see in the amounts of people that watch our television program or listen to the radio, we can definitely see that the stories about climate change, that there is a broad public. A lot of people are interested and a lot of people are really concerned. And as a matter of fact, to me, it's how do you say that? I can see more often that it also depends on how old the public is. We also have a specific news program for the youth, and they pay a lot more attention to the climate than the grown-up news program. Then we also see that the children and the grown-ups, that they are very interested, absolutely.
I see there are more questions in the room. If it's all right with you, let's save those for the panel. Clearly, Heleen has triggered a great level of interest. Thank you very much for that.
Okay.